Write that down for me, Saito. Write that down for me, Saito.
Hello from Burbank, California. Thank you for joining us once again for another episode of Write That Down on the Fight Game Media Network. I am Justin Knipper. I edit over at FightGameMedia.com. I'm a staff writer at F4W Online and WrestlingObserver.com. I also work for Pro Wrestling Known Cyber Fight Incorporated. And we're back with Japan's leading pro wrestling author, pro wrestling sociologist, pro wrestling historian, pro wrestling broadcast journalist, pro wrestling nice guy, Mr. Fumi Saito. On this week's episode, we're talking about the god of pro wrestling, Karl Gotch, and I hope we did a good enough job living up to the god of pro wrestling's nickname. We hit on topics. We hit on a lot of topics, although I know there's probably things that we missed, especially his time in India, that I'd like to learn more about. But we touched on the 1948 London Olympics that he was in. We talked about his relationship that he developed with Antonio Inoki and his time helping Inoki launch New Japan. And before that, his time in the WWWF and his time with Japanese companies like JWA, International Wrestling, and again, later, New Japan Pro Wrestling, and his overall influence on the world of Japanese pro wrestling, on the shortly coming world of MMA that would come out of Gotch's time, Gotch's philosophies, all the big names he not only influenced but trained. We hit on all of that in today's episode. So if you haven't already, before we get into everything, please subscribe to the Fight Game Media Network podcast feed on Spotify, Apple, Downcast, Stitcher, wherever you are usually listening to your podcasts. Hit the subscribe button. Give us a review if you like. It all helps us out a ton, actually. So, all right. Let's get into today's episode on Karl Gotch. All right, so today we are going to talk about, finally, and we were kind of surprised that we haven't actually done a show on him until now, but the god of wrestling, Karl Gotch. Can you believe that we haven't actually done an episode on him yet?
Hello from Tokyo. Yeah, we talk about Karl Gotch so much. Oh, when you talk about Antonio Inoki, we always have to touch upon the what Karl Gotch have done in Japan, or the beginning of MMA, or the shoot style wrestling, that the Karl Gotch style, the UWF style, the Maeda style, the Takada style, all these things, or the Pancras. We talk about that a lot, and those were the style of wrestling before there was such term MMA. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I couldn't believe we haven't done Karl Gotch episode alone. So I guess this is it's a good timing to do so.
Yeah.
And now that, because I can't believe it's been 4 weeks, just 1 month after Antonio Inoki's passing.
I know.
It's like, yeah, it's been as if time stood still. And people talk about Antonio Inoki every day today. I mean, still every day. And there's something about Inoki on newspaper, or something about him on TV, or on the internet, of course, constantly. And yeah, and all in all, Antonio Inoki was one of the best disciple of Karl Gotch. And he
Arguably
grew,
the best.
yeah. But what made Antonio Inoki special was that he grew out of Karl Gotch's wrestling aspect of it, and became bigger producer and promoter and politician. He's like, as a star, basically separated himself from Karl Gotch. So but the earlier on, there wouldn't be Antonio Inoki without Karl Gotch. Does that make sense? Early on.
Now, do you think that as Inoki's career went on and he stepped out of the wrestler role and stepped into more of a, who we know him as now, do you think he kept those philosophies that Karl Gotch instilled in him when he was trained? Do you think
In
he
the
had?
physical workout aspect, yes.
I see.
See, even after Inoki retired from active wrestling, he still worked out every day. Like whether it's in his diet, in national diet, the Parliament building, or the gym, or at his condominiums or the hotel rooms, that he just started working out. Like Inoki at his 70 some years old, that he start doing his Karl Gotch style Hindu squat, like 500 of them. No, we got to do a 1,000 today. It's just oh my gosh, somebody like his secretary or something knocks Antonio Inoki's hotel door, right? Hotel room. Knock, knock, knock. Mr. Inoki, right? He comes out all sweaty. You know what I'm saying? What are you doing, sir? Oh, I was just working out. Karl Gotch philosophy: if you have a foot here and foot there, at the little space, you can already work out. Isn't that interesting?
He was beyond dedicated.
Yeah, and also has this Karl Gotch method that if you have this much little space to have little stool on, you already have a space, and you don't need weight because a lot of Hindu squats, push-ups, and sit-ups, and wrestler style push-ups, and all kinds of the body, the things you use your own body weights, or pulling, or dipping. I mean,
Right,
just all these
natural
things.
body weight, natural. What's the word? Natural tension,
Yeah,
natural
yeah,
resistance.
yeah. If you are staying at the high, skyscraper type hotels, like up in the 55th, fifth floor or something, do up and down 5 times in the morning. Oh my gosh, you know what I'm saying?
He was
Run the stairs.
right. Fitness conditioning was extremely, extremely important to not
Yeah,
just
the
Karl
Karl
Gotch,
Gotch
but
apparently didn't really believe in weights, like iron weights. That's like a dead weights, son.
right. So he at least in the Western wrestling world, he is the one I always identify as making famous the Indian clubs.
Yeah, yeah. Some people call it koshiti, like Iranian clubs. We call it.
Hmm.
Yeah. What do you call it? Like a huge bowling pin looking like.
Yeah, like a club or a mace.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
I don't
It
know
came from
the.
Iran. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, Iranian club
Was
or
it from Pelwan? Like Pelwan, the Indian
Pakistan.
wrestling, Pakistan Indian wrestling, like form and structure. Wasn't that a part of their training? I'm not
In
sure of
that
the.
part of the world, anyhow. Yes.
Yes. Well, it
That,
comes
that,
from
that
the Middle Eastern part of the world and wrestling worlds, wrestling
Or
training.
if you consider Iran and Asia, that's Asia
Hmm.
too.
Sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
and the barbells and dumbbells are so Western, right?
Sure.
Yeah, but they had different form of weights. So Korgach believed in that, but more so, he believed in different sets of push-ups. Like a narrow one, the wider one, to a front one, to a like close to your body one. There's different style of push-ups that really strengthen different parts of your body and muscles. Yeah,
Hmm.
and endurance. The Hindu squats. 500, 1,000, 2,000 of those. Well, like that's your muscle, but more of endurance too.
Hmm.
Without endurance, strength mean nothing. Like Korogach was saying that a lot.
Conditioning was important. There's a
Conditioning was
the
yeah.
Gotch Bible, the kind of approach he took to not just training, but the what is it? You would take your deck of cards, right? You know the Gotch Bible, right?
Oh, of course, of course. But the Gotch Bible, but we have to point that out that the Gotch himself did not believe in the manual book. You could
Hmm.
never teach that and write it. Our show is write that down, right? But Core Gotch didn't really believe in writing these down and people read it and do the same. That doesn't work. You have to teach them in person
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
every person is like a drop of water in the ocean. Everybody's different. You have to coach each individual accordingly is what he was thinking.
Hmm.
Is that interesting? There's a lot of gotchaism, like so many words that he left. Like everybody knows the price, nobody knows the value. There's
Hmm.
a lot of things. It's just very interesting quote. I should have wrote everything down, but only just 10 of those. But we'll go through that today. Karl Gotch was born 1924, and died 2007, July 28th to be exact, just a week before his 83rd birthday. So he was 82. 1924. He was born in Antwerp, Belgium. But he was always considered in wrestling. He was from Germany, or he was German suplex, right? But some people predict that. Dispute that no, he was Belgium, not German. It's like, but we have to really. This part is like, well, some of these wrestling journalism or wrestling fans, or even the really book reading oriented wrestling fan forget about. We still have to learn a little bit of real history in Europe. That Europe is like a United States, that it's in the same big land that divided into different countries. In the states, it's like a states: California, the Oregon, the Illinois, you know what I'm saying. But in Europe, it's all in the same land, big, huge Atlantic. Then you have this, that what do you call it? Country boundaries. But to make a long story short, Belgium was occupied by Prussia German so many times over the years, over the centuries. And like you said before, that even within Belgium, there's a French-speaking Belgian population and a German-speaking Belgian population. And I witnessed that he spoke German to his mother. And there's another language that skipping,
Flemish.
skip. Yeah. He really spoke the language at
Uh,
home.
Flemish was
Yeah,
like the kind of not local dialect, but the native language to the physical Belgian country, right?
yeah. Then at home, in your kitchen at home, it's like Belgian food and German foods are very similar too.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. And he
Um.
always named his dogs German names.
Right. So, and this is where years later we would get the German suplex, not the Belgian suplex.
Right. And also, he was introduced by upon his first arrival to Japan in 1961. That he was, Ricky Dawson's third annual World League tournament. That he, representing Germany. And so he was always introduced as a German person and spoke German, of course. And but he was born in Antwerp, Belgium, and he was always, calling himself. I was a kid from waterfront, Antwerp, yeah,
Hmm.
and started learning, going to wrestling dojo. It's not a dojo, but we have to say like a dojo, like you know, there was like in Japan, there's like not the school, but the place you can go learn judo or kendo or aikido, the karate, that the little school,
Hmm.
in your neighborhood club, and that the young Karl Gotch, I should say Karl Estas, right? Estas, I mean
Right.
real name, Istaz, Estas.
Hmm.
That's a good German name right there, right?
Hmm.
Yeah. He started going to this, local wrestling dojo when he was 8, much like later on Billy Robinson learned, was doing as a kid, in Lancashire.
Hmm.
Anyhow, that Karl Gotch started learning wrestling when he was 8 years old. His father sent him there, and we have to wonder what kind of wrestling was it? Was it an amateur wrestling, or uh, that's another part that we have to learn the real history. That there are all kinds folk wrestling all over the world, all over the
Hmm.
Europe.
I was
Well,
going
some
to
people,
ask,
yeah,
was he like wasn't necessarily a Ketchkan Lancashire specialist. He wasn't known as that, but he also wasn't. He didn't. I don't know exactly what his was. He Greco-Roman specialist, or was it like you said, just maybe a mix of European folk styles at the time?
yeah. Even within Europe, there's like a 5, 6 different kind of wrestling. Basically, Lancashire, catch as catch can. more of a British style wrestling became Olympics today's freestyle. Whereas uh, freehand wrestling, like above West, they used to call it French
Mm-hmm.
style wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
They became Greco-Roman wrestling. So amateur wrestling, as we know today, was created for the like a more amateur purpose and Olympic purpose. But the actual wrestlers participating in early Olympics, guys, they came from, for instance, from India or Iran or some. They were from oil wrestling and sand wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
Remember? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So even the early amateur wrestling wrestlers in Japan, they were all judokas. Judo
Mm.
people adopted wrestling, and they fought. They took the gi off and put a wrestling gear and followed the wrestling rule, and therefore had the wrestling match, amateur style. So I'm not so sure that the what style of wrestling Karl Gotch was learning as a kid. It could be just catch as catch can or a style of wrestling. But all in all, he participated in 1948 London Olympic
Mm-hmm.
representing Belgium. He went to Olympic. That's the good amateur, right? Right there.
Very much so.
Yeah, he didn't win any medals, but 1948 Olympic, London Olympic, just see uh, another history lesson. During the war, 1940 Olympic and 1944 Olympic postponed twice during the war.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that was like a reopening of Olympic 1948, and that was an Olympic that Vern Gagne from America went to, Mad Dog Vachon from Canada went to, and Dick Hutton, that the later on NWA World Champion, went to the Olympic, and Karl Gotch also participated in 1948 London Olympic. All kinds that the heavyweight amateur wrestler turned pro right after that, and Karl Gotch was one of them. Still from Belgium, and this is like a really sketchy because there's not written data of when was his debut year as a pro and what was and where the match was. And I believe he debuted as a professional wrestler i- somewhere in Belgium, somewhere before 1951. That's as much as we know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then European pro wrestling is more of a tournament oriented. Like Hanover, or the Bell, that the Bremen tournament, the Hanover tournament, more like a seasonal, season, September tournament, the October tournament, that kind of thing. And he wrestled professionally 1950, 51 ish. Then met Billy Robinson's uncle, Alf Robinson. Isn't that interesting? Billy Robinson's uncle, though,
Mm.
who was also a professional wrestler. He told young Karl Gotch, then he was still wrestling under Carl Istas. Oh, for a record, if you go into Olympic data website, there's like a real actual accurate record of Olympic, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a couple websites. If you go into Olympic website and go into 1948 London Olympic, both Greco and freestyle, he was a light heavyweight and wrestled under Charles Istas.
Mm.
You can find his record. So see, some of these professional wrestling stats are kind of fabricated, right?
I mean, they're so old and they've been passed down and uh, passed
But
from.
Carl really wrestled Olympic,
That's right.
1948.
So, did
Yeah.
he have kind of a name for himself? Did he make a name for himself on the wrestling scene? Be it like the amateur level or into the professional level? What do
But
people think of
if
him
you
by this
represent
point?
a country and going to Olympic Games, that you top of the field, top of the whole genre, don't you think?
Hmm.
Yeah,
But
much like
unfortunately,
the Vern Gagne was in
uh,
America.
well, it just seems like in Belgium and in a lot of Europe that wrestling after the wars wasn't as popular as it was, say, in North America or other places.
Okay, the capital of wrestling moved to North America.
Hmm.
Yeah, well, but it happened way back in 1908. you know, Okay, let's put it this way. Professional wrestling is older than amateur wrestling. People don't know about that.
Mm-hmm.
1908, there was a Frank Gotch against Russian Lion George Hackenschmidt, right?
Mm-hmm.
The European World Heavyweight Champion George Hackenschmidt came from Europe and came to America and had a unification that your undisputed world heavyweight title match against Frank Gotch, and American Frank Gotch from Iowa won. Therefore, the capital of professional wrestling moved from Europe to America. That's the part that we have to point out. And some people say back in 1908, Frank Gotch and George Hackenschmidt had two matches, title matches, and twice Frank Gotch won. Some people think it was all content, legitimate fight, shoot. Some people say it was already a work. We don't know that because there's no video footage or movies or anything like that. Just newspaper clipping and the tales and the stories that's been told. It's an interesting research to do, That anyhow, back to Korogach. He participated in Olympic 1948 and turned professional and wrestled European tournaments. Then, sometime in 1951, I believe, young Carl Istas, met Billy Robinson's uncle, Alf Robinson, and Alf Robinson told Carl to come to uh, Lancashire, the Wigan in England. Then, between 1951 to 1959, so 8-year period, Carl actually lived in Wigan, England, and learned his later known as submission wrestling from Snake Pit Billy Riley. Isn't that like a big story right there?
Yeah, he
Interesting, right?
beginning
Yeah.
of his world journey, his adventure around, because he didn't just stop there. He'd go through Asia, he'd go through Middle East.
Yeah. But he was already professional wrestler, and he I think he really liked the British style of living. That's when he picked up English language speaking. See, he had real heavy accent all until the day he died. Right?
Mm-hmm.
He spoke English fine, but he always had this German, like it was like a strict European accent to speak. And he did live in Wigan, uh, England between 1951 and 1959 for 8-year period, and he basically spent the entire time at Snake Pit, Billy Riley's Snake
Mm-hmm.
Pit, wrestling gym, catch as catch can, because amateur wrestling don't allow to have this submission hold, right? To make people submit.
That's right.
Yeah, amateur wrestling is a point system and how to get to pin somebody on the both shoulders on the mat. Sometimes the rules have changed and you don't even have to pin the guy because the guy had the shoulder down, you had gone, right?
Mm. And
But
this was a big difference from the European style, which had the submissions. All different
what
kinds
he
of wrestling
yeah,
in Europe had the
then he
submission
learned the
aspect.
craft from the best, like people like Billy
Mm.
Riley, of course, and there was a Billy Joyce, and there's all kinds of guys. And actually, the tail, young Billy Robinson and young girl Karl Gotch actually wrestled at the
Mm.
dojo
Wow.
one night. Yeah, and basically Karl Gotch killed Billy Robinson on the mat.
Mm.
But Karl Gotch was 29-year-old professional, and Billy Robinson was 14-year-old kid that time. We have to remember that.
Ah, okay.
Interesting, huh? Yeah,
Yeah.
because there's an age difference. So those two had a unique relationship, like almost like a relative. You know, that for Billy Robinson, Karl Gotch was like his uncle from another relatives.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're close. They're very close.
Close relationship.
Yeah, and the British and German, yeah, and difference. And in Europe, there's always an argument that the which country created wrestling as an institution of wrestling. that the French always thought no, the wrestling was created by French, all the way from Greco-Roman. That's why they named it Greco-Roman. It's like a 19th century invention. Yeah,
Mm,
that the today's Greco-Roman wrestling has nothing to do with ancient Greek or Rome. You know what I'm saying? It
mm,
was a French idea because British style catch can became so popular, and it became today's amateur wrestling is freestyle. So they, I guess, they honored both British style and French style. One became freestyle and one became Greco-Roman. Anyhow, that the Karl Gotch and all these like lions, huh, at the Snake Pit Dojo. Can you imagine the working up? This is not a wrestling ring, just mat, you know. And a lot of professional came out of it, and he really enjoyed that 8 years in Britain, and he mastered this later on known as Korogach style submission wrestling craft. Then he went on. He also during that period he worked British pro wrestling too, and in 1959 finally moved to Montreal, Canada, in order to migrate to America. He wanted to be an American. The reason he wanted in the car wanted to be an American was that when the war was over, I'm sorry to go back and forth. That I hope people understand. I kind of skipped a few years. In 1945, when Carl was 21, he was actually captured by Nazis. And he was in a concentration camp, and he was in the it's like a basically, let's put it that way, he's like a Holocaust survivor. Karl Gotch was, and he was rescued by American soldier when war was over in summer of 1945, and he decided that I want to be an American.
mm.
That's what young Korogach, decided. The wrestling was his way of, see the world, travel the world, and then started wrestling in Belgium, started wrestling in Europe. And when I met Billy Robinson's uncle, and he was invited to England, he lived in Wigan for 8 years, and finally, as a professional wrestler, moved to Montreal first. Probably like something to do with European visa or the passport. Yeah, but he moved to French-speaking Montreal, and then he finally migrated to America in end of 1959 into 1960. That's like a 20th century adventure, don't you think?
Very much so, because also the idea of wrestling, or what wrestling was at the time, was very, very different from now, and still evolving out of the war. So, I mean, there was what was happening in the States, and there was happening all over North America and Japan. But Karl Gotch seemed to have, he navigated a different path, and he found out a lot more about wrestling and taught a lot about wrestling later on.
Yeah, but we still have to be reminded that I'm not saying that the wrestling was all shoot in that part, that period. I think all through 20th century, 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, wrestling was already work.
Right. It didn't look like it does today, but right, there
Yeah,
was
then it was very closed society. Only wrestlers share the secrets.
hmm,
And he went down. Still, his ring name 59 1960 was still uh, parts Carl Estes and sometimes Carl Krauser.
mhm.
Another name, Carol Krauser. There was another person with same name, very confusing. That if you do the googling, that you may find two different Carol Krauser. One is completely another person, and one is Korogach. And he didn't become Korogach until 1961. He became adopted Gotch name in Cincinnati, Ohio in 1961. The promoter, Ohio promoter Al Haft, Al is in AL and Haft is HAFT. People can look it up. He's a big time Ohio promoter. We still have to understand the fact that there was a territories, right? Now people watch Tales from the Territories television, so this probably understand that there's like a 20, 25 different territory over all over the states, and also, every state had their own set of wrestling company and territory and under their own roster, and in the beginning of television, and people attend live card, and young Karl Gotch ended up working Al Haft's promotion in Ohio. Ohio was a very popular wrestling place, and some people. Okay, the reason his name was given Gotch was that the promoter Al Haft was also a wrestler in his in his days. That the promoter Al Haft's ring name when he was active wrestler was Young Gotch. Young Gotch. The name that the promoter Al Haft took from original Frank Gotch, right? And Ohio promoter Al Haft looked at young Carl and said, okay, this guy is Gotch, therefore Carl Gotch. So Carl Gotch is so famous, but actually his name was adapted from the original Frank Gotch from turn of the century. Are you with me even?
Mm.
Yeah.
It kind of gave him, especially in the States, it might have given him an image of a real technician or somebody who's really best of the
And
best at what they do.
yeah, and then stands tall and just so dignified looking, and then no nonsense wrestler, right? I mean, that's Carl Gotch was. And the first trip to Japan, he was already, oh my gosh, this guy's really special, And he participated in Ricky Dozan's third annual World League tournament in spring of 1960, 62, 61, 62. Then, yeah, 1961 for sure. Yeah, 1961. Anyhow, that was the first trip. And some people dispute that Korogachi was never a star in wrestling world, right?
Hmm.
It's not entirely accurate because uh, Ohio ran a company called AWA. I'm sorry, AWA is automatically think it's like a later on 60s, 70s, 80s Vern Gagne's Midwest AWA, right?
Hmm.
But
But it
it's a
wasn't.
different, it was different AWA, American Wrestling Association. They name it, right? There was 1920s, there was Boston AWA, American Wrestling. There was like a Illinois version of AWA. There was a Montreal version of American Wrestling Association. You just name it. It sounds like American Wrestling Association sounds like a wrestling governing body, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, so there were one, two, three, like four or five different AWA through the 20th century. This version of AWA, the Korogachi worked in early 60, was also AWA in Columbus, Ohio, and he won their world heavyweight title in 1962, beating young Don Leo Jonathan. Yeah. And this version of AWA World Heavyweight title was unified with Lou Thesz's NWA World title in 1964. So 2 year period, he was like in Midwest, uh, Ohio and surrounding areas, good sized territory. But he was also, Carl was local or regional, I should say. He was world heavyweight champion. Then the unification match took place in 1964, and Luthez beat Coro. Therefore, the this Ohio AW became um, NWA territory. That's it's kind of political, but what I'm saying is that some people is saying that Korogachi was never a wrestling star in America. That's not entirely true. That he went to Australia in following year 1965 when there was a big territory in Australia run by Jim Burnett. There's like a traveling touring company. All kinds of superstars from America and Europe travel to uh, that part of country. Australia and New Zealand. They had tours.
You remember
And
what that was called, right? We had the Ohio AWA, and in
yeah, he was
Australia,
champion.
in Aust-
Australia,
you had WCW, the original.
yeah, World Championship Wrestling. See, the people name these, because this is almost generic sounding. American Wrestling Association. They named that.
Hmm.
And Australia World Championship Wrestling. Not the WCW we know from 90s, like a Ted Turner company, but there was another World Championship Wrestling run by none other than Jim Burnett, their own American promoter. He moved, Jim Burnett moved to Australia and had very healthy, very lucrative wrestling company for about 8, 9 year period.
Hmm.
And Karl Gotch toured there and beat Spiros Arion to become their version of IWA World Heavyweight title champion. IWA sounds like International Wrestling Association, right?
Right.
They named those,
But it was
but
not
it's
the one that
with
you
Mil
might know.
Mascaras or anything like that.
Sure,
Yeah.
yeah.
Or Kokusai in Japan. Yeah.
Hmm.
IWA was there are a lot of IWAs in Puerto Rico or even Calgary. Promoters, old fashioned promoter tend to name their company kind of big, right?
Hmm.
International Wrestling Association or Alliance or American Wrestling Association. So it's confusing. But Carl won Ohio Al Half's version of AW World Heavyweight title, and he had won Australian Jim Burnett's version of IWA World Heavyweight title, and get closer to today's in 1971 him and Rene Goulet won WWWF tag team world tag team title in Vince McMahon Senior's WWF. So
That's right.
he had traveled and worked as traditional pro wrestlers but never really lost what he had learned in Wigan Snake Pit. I'm not sure he really used the technique in American style wrestling ring.
I mean, definitely not in WWF. I mean,
Yeah.
but it's not like not like he compromised what he was doing either. He wrestled in he could get over and get popular with the fans back then too, with Rene Goulet, if you go and watch the videos. You
Oh,
can
that
see,
video actually exists.
yeah,
That
you go
Karl
out there on
Gotch,
YouTube. Yeah,
Renegade against the rugged Russians.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's out there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's out there. And Carl is having a great time dancing and doing a
Mm.
babyface move and even some funny looking Mongolian chops and 2 out of 3 fall match and Carl lose second fall 1, 2, 3. I was like I was like shocked, because never seen it.
Right.
50 years later I heard about him, you know, as a kid, I heard about him winning WWF tag team title, right? Oh my gosh, right? And so he was doing American style in New York. And when you see that YouTube footage, Karl Gotch being introduced as Great Karl Gotch.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
Like he had a storied background coming into WWF. He already had a reputation that preceded him from around the world, from the training, from the championship matches.
Yeah, and then he's always been this no nonsense guy, and he always had the simple, plain, single trunks and ring shoes, not even knee pads,
Hmm.
and just does his thing. Yeah. So
When he was wrestling in America, if you watch some of these older pieces of footage of him, you could see that he did a lot of the fancy, well, I guess you would call it the general British style of show pro
Europeans,
wrestling.
that was
The
very, very, very similar to what Billy Robinson was doing in 70s, 80s.
Yes, less like the shoot MMA style that he, I guess, would become famous for training people in. It was more like a
It's more of a what do you call it?
classic.
Or what's the key of chains that they come off or ring game,
Um, like I'm not sure,
wire,
like a slinky.
yeah, wire puzzle kind of thing.
I'm not familiar, but I think I know the metaphor you're going for, where
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
where you're trading hold for hold, and you just kind of get
yeah,
lost
yeah.
in
And
the chain wrestling, like chain
right.
links.
And if the younger audience out there wanna, like has a certain image, it's like a real early Steve Regal
Hmm.
before William Regal, like in WCW version of William Regal, today's Steven Regal, today's William Regal. He was doing that.
Or even
Very
Zack Sabre Jr.
oh, exactly. Today,
He's the modern
that's
version.
it. Yeah, very much so.
Kind
Yeah,
of
Zach Sabre. Thank you. That's like that. Yeah,
tricky, not based in big high spots or taking huge bumps, but more of a
yeah.
athletic
One move after
cleverness.
another. His opening. Then hold your wrist, hold your hands, hold your ankle or toe.
Spin around.
Yeah, and then it's pretty fancy too. You know,
Hmm. And
if
he could
you
do
like
that
that style.
style. Karl Gotch could
Yeah,
really do that style well.
and actually, that's very legitimate. You know
Hmm.
that if people refuse to go with it, he'll still do it to you.
Right, because there is that the balance of, well, there's a work in the ring and there's a way to do it the real way, organic way. So
Yeah,
a wrestler
yeah.
like Gotch is always he's pushing that line of is this sequence between us, or is this something that I can actually escape from, or you can escape from, or and that's the kind of
And
thinking that goes
also,
into.
there is no manual that
Hmm.
it's more like not that the music with notes. It's more jazz.
Sure, is more improvised.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It has
That's
to do with
why.
how the crowd reacts. It has to do with what's going
Or
on.
what you're looking at. The
Hmm.
opening here and the opening there. Just imagine Karl Gotch and Fujiwara wrestling on the mat.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, which they did. Um, then we should go into the Karl Gotch relationship with Japan.
Hmm.
He had moved to Japan. Japan Pro Wrestling, Nippon Pro Wrestling, JWA, invited him over to be not just wrestler but coach, living in Japan. And there's a two period. It was like I always said he lived in Japan for 2 year period, but technically he did it twice. Um, November of 67 to 68, then came back in spring of 68 and stayed until May of 69. So another year. So like a 2 year period, he lived in Japan and trained at the Nippon Pro Wrestling JWA Dojo. It's called Gotch Kyohitsu. That's a Gotch clinic.
So was he in charge of the classes, or was he training other people, or was he?
Yeah, yeah,
What?
well, not a class for anybody. It's a wrestler's clinic.
Hmm.
Not like today's wrestling school, people pay to come and learn. He only did it for existing professional wrestlers. That's when he really spent time at the dojo with Antonio Inoki. Or I should say Antonio Inoki spent a lot of time with Carl.
Hmm.
Yeah. There's like a Japanese wrestler that they were active around that, late 60s into early 70s part. They were basically all trained by Karl Gotch one time or another. And Inoki decided to spend time with this guy. And of course, back in 1961, 18, 19-year-old Inoki met Karl Gotch while Ricky Dozan was still alive. Like a young lion kind of thing. Inoki was, but the 67, 68, 69 version of Antonio Inoki already a young star, right?
Hmm.
But he wanted to spend more time at dojo with Carl. And Carl gave Anthony Inoki first octopus hold, the manjigatame octopus
Hmm.
hold. I
Hmm.
mean, up until then, Inoki's finish was cobra twist, abdominal stretch. But the moderate version of abdominal stretch became later signature hold octopus. You know the one I'm talking about. It's a real famous one that's
Of
always on
course.
cover of Inoki magazine. Octopus. Then Inoki introduced that in the ring in 68. Whoa, great, new move, new finish, right? Then in 69, Inoki introduced Korogach style German suplex as a very special finish.
Hmm.
Isn't that interesting? Korogach gave Inoki, octopus hold and German suplex.
I think during it was what, early 72 when they had the first New Japan match, and that was what
I'll get to
Gotch.
that.
Oh,
I'll get
okay.
to that. Yeah, because
Okay,
this
rewind.
we're still talking about Japan Pro Wrestling, Nippon Pro Wrestling, JWA Dojo.
So who else? Not just Inoki, but who else did he come
Oh,
across
like a
when he was at
rookie
the J?
Sakaguchi
Okay, so yeah, who else
and
did he work with at the dojo?
uh Tiger Chanli Toguchi.
Okay.
Yeah, Kim Dak. Mr. Hito Adachi went to Calgary and became coach.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or the you may not be familiar with, but the Otsubo, Kiyotaka Otsubo, or there's like an older wrestler who was like a mid card wrestler who spends a lot of time in dojo, not quite stars, but every single one of these Japanese wrestlers were trained by Karl Gotch in these 2 year period, and that the dojo training method became Karl Gotch method.
So
And
the
anybody who started any other company or anybody who trained after that, it was Karogach method, knowing it or not knowing it. Isn't that
that
interesting?
that
Yeah,
was
that's
the I guess the training menu. Even today, a lot of it is still
yeah,
incorporated.
wrestler style push-ups, like a stretching push-ups.
Yeah, like or lion push-ups. Sometimes they call
Yeah,
it.
yeah. And the push-up board, like a little
Mm-hmm.
plate that you hold, while you are, doing the push-ups or Korogach style push-ups, Korogach style dipping, pulling, all these things that it was Korogach method that it's not just Mr. Hito and Tiger Chanli or Kintaro Oki or Ruki Sakaguchi. Everybody who was at the dojo was trained by Koro, and that method remained even after Koro left. Yeah, so that's Japanese training basically. I mean, even all the way to today's, the Hindu squat style, the push-up style of pulling the ropes, dip, pulling, chinning, all these things, Korogachi style. And also, um, he was not much of the like a wrestling politician, right? Because the Korogach, as an active wrestler at the time, he was so sick of this wrestling politics wherever he went. That Montreal, Ohio, that he worked Minneapolis, that Nebraska. He went to even Tampa, Florida. Went to Australia and Asian countries. It's just like, wow, it's like you had. It's always promoter's choice. The decision making. If if promoter tells wrestler something, all wrestler can ask was how high.
Mm.
Yeah, and then he was really sick of it because he was genuine wrestlers and never was part of productions or part of creative. And it really was a match made in heaven that he came to Japan and he really taught Japanese wrestlers what he knows. Not the wrestling politics part of it, but the actual wrestling method. Are you with me?
The style,
Yeah, yeah, and the craft, the
the
art of it.
philosophy, a lot of the approach. You see it in all the top stars in different companies still today. You probably always will see some kind of connection.
Yeah, oh, he even trained with Giant Baba, but the Antonio Inoki looked something in Koro that this is something that if he really um um like can learn this choreographed style thing, this is something that Inoki will surpass Giant Baba as a star.
Hmm. With
See,
Gotcha's system.
yeah, that the Giant Baba was always bigger star than Inoki all through 60s, early into 70s, probably in until Inoki had a Muhammad Ali fight. And then the
Hmm.
general population knew Inoki's name better. But until then, Giant Baba was always bigger star than the 5 year younger Antonio Inoki. Yeah, we need to point that out.
Hmm.
But with Carl's method, this is it. Antonio felt this is it, huh? You know, and he will become like Karl Gotch. And Karl Gotch's, nickname wasn't God of Wrestling then. His nickname in Japan in late 60s was Uncrowned Champion. Isn't that interesting?
Mm.
Yeah,
It
because
was.
he wasn't Luthes. he wasn't Buddy Rogers, you know. Um, yeah, but every bit as good as any champions in America or all over the world, you know, I should say. The Karl Gotch meant something in Japanese wrestling. I mean, that's like a beginning of God of Wrestling era. And that became his nickname in the birth of New Japan. See, it's another history lesson. Inoki tried to clean up the booking and the bookkeeping and the money situation of Nippon Pro Wrestling and wanted to clean up. It's like we're drawing so many people and the TV ratings good and all these. And the company must be making money. Why aren't we making money, right? Inoki went in and checked all these, you know, balancing and the bookkeeping and because of it, Yoshino Sato and Kokichi Endo, or then Japan Pro Wrestling, Nippon Pro Wrestling bosses, basically fired Inoki. That young 29-year-old Inoki was going to steal Japan Pro Wrestling from us. Instead, they fired Inoki. Therefore, beginning of New Japan Pro Wrestling. And old Japan Pro Wrestling tried to block everything from Inoki from starting the company. You know, you and I talked about this monopoly, the mentality, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Inoki, 29-year-old Inoki was, basically got fired or left, left the company, the old company. Ricky Dawson, he's not there, but the Japan Pro Wrestling, Nippon Pro Wrestling, JWA, and he had to start his own company. And January of 1972, Inoki went to either it was in Philadelphia or New York while Karl Gotch was traveling WWE tour, WWF tour. He went to Carl, straight to Carl. I need your help. I'm starting a new company, and this is going to be like you. Therefore, the birth of Strong Style Pro Wrestling. And Carl basically quit WWF right then and left. So actually, Carl Gotch Renegade combination having WWF tag team title only for 2 months because Carl decided to leave. And okay, I'm with you, Inoki, and they were the partner, to therefore the beginning of New Japan Pro Wrestling, and the negotiation was quick. January of 1972, Inoki and Korogach met and decided to to work together and start the New Japan Pro Wrestling. In March of 72, Koro was already in Japan. And the very first show at the Ota Gym, they didn't have anything else. So they did Inoki against Korogach single match. Inoki, then 30 years old, Carl, 47. Kind of getting old, right?
Right.
But yeah, but it was like they brought in other American wrestlers that the Carl was able to book. But he, like I said, he was never a promoter in America, or they didn't have that kind of interest, booking wrestlers to a different town or to be a promoter or this and that. But Inoki didn't have much connection either, in establishment. And Nippon Pro Wrestling blocked every promoters in the territories all over America, and NWA promoters like do not talk to Inoki, right? So basically, it was blocked and like a NWA blackballing system.
Sure.
Inoki was outlaw, and the Carl was the only friend he had in and out of the ring, huh?
Seemed that way. It seemed that
Yeah.
way, and it was kind of a risk. Nobody knew how New Japan would do and if they would survive, or because look what happened.
Without they started without televisions, that like network money or anything. Yeah,
And there was Tokyo Pro Wrestling right before that. It didn't work
he
out.
he failed. Yeah,
So there wasn't. I mean, it was a risk. It was a
yeah, it
big
was
risk.
like New Japan Pro Wrestling was going to be his Inoki's second attempt of starting outlaw company.
Hmm.
Yeah, but this time Japan Pro Wrestling was there. Inoki's New Japan Pro Wrestling. And Baba, with the same reason, 6 months later, left Nippon Pro Wrestling to open All Japan Pro Wrestling. Therefore, 1972 was the year Inoki opened New Japan Pro Wrestling and Giant Baba opened All Japan Pro Wrestling. Then, following year, sure enough, 1973, Nippon Pro Wrestling went down.
Hmm.
Yeah. So that's like a real history of it. Inoki started New Japan Pro Wrestling with Karl Gotch. With Karl Gotch.
Hmm.
And the first opening show was single match, no title, nothing, and just plain, straight, strong style pro wrestling in like a darker arena. That because Japan Pro Wrestling, Nippon Pro Wrestling blocked New Japan from using Korakuen Hall. And they had to go to, that was the reason they started at the Ota Gymnasium, like a suburb of Tokyo. It's
Mhm.
okay. It's a single match between Karl Gotch and Antonio Inoki. Antonio Inoki being 30, and Karl Gotch, I believe, was 47. But they had the ideal title at the single match, and Karl beat Inoki that night.
One
I
of
think
the
it was a very smart way to start, huh? Because if Inoki beat Karl that night, what would be the next?
and it was one of the last times Inoki would lose a match in his career. It was one of the very few losses
Yeah,
he
for about
took,
another 10 years. Yeah.
right? It was
Yeah.
it actually helped build up the image of
Actually,
Karl
he lost
Gotch.
uh, technically Inoki and Karl Gotch had about six important single match next year or two.
Mhm.
And Inoki lost a couple times. But against nobody else.
Mm.
If it was Karl, yeah. And Karl, but you cannot rely on Karl, 48-year-old Karl Gotch so long. But he was a mobile coach. He came to New Japan Dojo every day and like start training rookie Yoshiaki Fujiwara, of course. Yeah,
Mm. I was going to ask
yeah.
about his
Then
relationship.
rookie, because he at the time Fujiwara, came to Tokyo to be wrestler. He didn't know how to be professional wrestler. They're working for restaurants and that fish market and doing a lot of things and working at the gym and to get big. And right when Inoki started New Japan Pro Wrestling, that had to be it. And he came to dojo. Then met Karl and people like young, a little bit later on, like in the beginning of '76, young Satoru Sayama, of
Mhm.
course. Yeah, later on Tiger Mask. And every single one of them, like Masanobu Chris or Don Arakawa, the very young Kuniaki Kobayashi, Osamu Kido, they were all trained by uh, Karl Gotch. And it's like pretty much, stopped wrestling in the ring around that time period that the Karl was like simply New Japan dojo coach. Yeah. Oh, interesting enough, though, the people like, like a Mr. Pogo or Grand Hamada, like they're rookies, they were there at the New Japan dojo, trained under Karl Gotch. They don't look like they're Karl Gotch students, but Mr. Pogo, young Mr. Pogo, right out of sumo, that Grand Hamada, later on, that the Lucha Libre legend, they were all trained under Karl too.
It's
Interesting, huh?
pretty. So that's the first. Well, not even the first. I guess it's the second generation of his
Yeah, because he
trainees.
was coach at Nippon Pro Wrestling in late '60s. But this beginning of New Japan Dojo, beginning of New Japan Pro Wrestling was like a really the period Karl trained a lot of Japanese wrestlers. That basically everybody came out of New Japan Dojo. After that, it was Karl's students.
Now,
Yeah.
how long did he stay connected with New Japan?
It's really like it's complicated because he wasn't all that like active in the ring. He was basically dojo coach, and Inoki against Korogach single match program in the ring only lasted about 2 years, so 73, 74 then. And New Japan had to have all kinds of American wrestlers to do the, calendar year tour, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you'll have people like Tiger Jeet Singh to be the big heel superstar, right? And Carl, and also signed, New Japan signed the, business partnership with Vince McMahon Sr. So more American superstars start coming in, you know?
Mm.
And I think that somewhat, somehow, Carl Gotch influence being phased down or pushed away, or, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, Karl, as an active wrestler, Karl Gotch as an active wrestler, he started 1951, right?
Hmm.
After 1948 Olympic. He went to Europe and England and Canada to America to different parts of Europe or Asia, Japan. Then he wasn't all that active. I mean, there was a parts that you can't find any match result from Karl Gotch, like a year here and a year there.
Mm. It wasn't
So,
the kind of he wasn't doing the kind of thing that was being recorded by hand or with any videotape. It was a little more off the beaten path.
I mean, like in the 60s into early part 70s, there's no video, there's
Hard to
no
find.
internet. Yeah, hard to find. And right before, a year before this New Japan opening in 1971, he had worked for IWE in Japan, International Wrestling Enterprise,
Hmm.
the third company. That's a legendary 1971 IWA World Series. Young Under the Giant Monster Rushmore, younger Billy Robinson, and Karl Gotch coming out of retirement had a very famous legendary tournament match. Billy Robinson, Karl Gotch, and Young Under the Giant for IWE. It's like a legendary match. I watched it as a kid.
Yeah.
And at the time, Karl was living in Hawaii,
Hmm.
working for the city, that like basically driving garbage truck
Hmm.
for about a year because he went over there to work as a wrestler and he didn't get along with Francis family of Hawaii promoters. He worked there, but he basically, time to retire. He was like a 46, 47, right? So
Hmm.
he lived in Hawaii and uh, was working for the city, basically, the driving garbage truck. But the IW promoter, Isao Yoshiwara, really wanted to have a Korogachi in the ring. So he came out of retirement and started working active wrestler again. That's when Karl's daughter met Masami Soranaka in Hawaii and got married.
Mm.
Yeah, because we have to put these pieces of puzzle, together,
And they'll come
And
late. Yeah. So that's how they got connected. Okay. Soranaka and
yeah,
and
Soranaka and yeah.
Karl
So
Gotch.
right, right. And by 72, he was back in active role and he, of all places, went to Vince McMahon Sr.'s WWWF and was working full time until Inoki came in and asked for help. Now connected?
Hmm.
Yeah. But 73, 74 on, he, Carl wasn't really active as a wrestler anymore and he was like pushing 50, right? But there's a record that 1977, he worked in Mexico as an active wrestler.
Wow.
1977, yeah, as late as 1977, with American wrestler called Karl Gotch Jr. You know who that was?
No, who was it?
American wrestler Karl Gotch Jr. was later on Joe Malenko, Jody.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, the history is really interesting. See, with that I think that Karl Gotch in 72, 73, 74, and all the way to like 77, 78, he was under New Japan contract, wrestler or not, because he was sending wrestler to New Japan, was also training wrestlers, coming to come to Japan 3 months at a time. And I like in the mid 80s, when he was coaching UWF, I watched Korogachi's training. He spoke Japanese while he was coaching Japanese. Mae ushiro, ichi ni san, mae ushiro, it's like yoko yoko, something like that. Wow, it's all in Japanese, right? He did pick up some Japanese. I mean, he didn't really speak fluent Japanese, but good enough where he can really communicate in Japanese.
Hmm. You could
That,
probably coach a class in Japanese.
yeah, anyhow, that he with New Japan's annual income, he finally bought the house in Tampa, Florida, or Odessa, Florida, the Tampa suburb.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Odessa.
yeah. Odessa, yeah, that's where Chris Jericho lives
Huh.
now. Yeah, like right next to, I mean, suburb of Tampa. Anyhow, that Tampa house was where all kinds of Japanese wrestlers came and stayed with Carl. younger Yoshiaki Fujiwara, young Fujinami for a 6 month period, Kido, that right after Mexican, that there was there's a time between Satoru Sayama's um, Mexican tour and British tour. Right before he became, Sayama became Tiger Mask. A couple years before he became Tiger Mask, Sayama was in Mexico as Satoru Sayama. Okay, then came to Carl's house and stayed a period of time and just trained. And Carl was the one to send young Sayama to England, and he became Sammy Lee.
Mm-hmm.
Then New Japan called him back to become the Tiger Mask. And Satoru Sayama also was Karl Gotch's student. Yeah, and so many. But I think that New Japan's business partnership with WWE sort of overshadowed that the connection with Carl, and probably 1978, 1977, 1978, 1979 version of Antonio Inoki didn't need Karl Gotch anymore.
Right. He was
Yeah.
already pretty big star by this point.
And also partnership with WWE, and you have Bob Backlund and all these people coming in, and then Karl Gotch come in every now and then to be the title match witness. You know what I'm saying? But he didn't have not any other roles. If you remember, 1976 Inoki Muhammad Ali fight, you find Korogachi Inoki's corner.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. And as late as 1977, he was wrestling in Mexico a little bit. I think it wasn't for him. It was young Jody Malenko, and he was named Korogachi Jr., and that was his young experience because Jody Malenko's father, the great Boris Malenko, was good friend of Carl in Tampa. I was
Mhm.
just about the only friend. Carl was hard to deal with, right?
Was he?
Oh God, he's very hard to deal with, because he's a loner and he's like a no nonsense in wrestling ring, but he was no nonsense in private life too. He hates liars, and of course he should, but he only deal with honest friends, you know. And I guess Japanese students were so loyal to him that he had many Japanese friends, but American wrestling related friends, that he didn't. I mean, didn't socialize with wrestling, community. If you lived in Tampa, Florida, you would think you would go to Sportatorium, that the NWA territory, the Eddie Graham family, all these. He did not have anything to do with them. Instead, he helped Boris Malenko's outlaw company in Florida. Later on, those Malenko students all came to UWF, though. Remember?
Hmm.
There's
Yeah,
an
it was kind
interesting
of the
connection.
early UWF stars.
Yeah, so image of Carl, God of Wrestling thing is like almost like a no longer needed, like in 1980 version of New Japan Pro Wrestling. Actually, it was Akira Maeda who revived Carl Gotch. Upon his return from England, uh, young Akira Maeda, 23-year-old Akira Maeda, was put in the main event cluster upon his return from British tour. That the first inaugural 1983 first inaugural IWGP tournament, he was representing Europe, if you remember.
Hmm.
Akira Maeda. And young Akira Maeda, didn't think he was ready to be in the main event cluster. What he asked New Japan Company at the time is like, I'm going, let me go to Korogachi's house. Therefore, all of a sudden, 1980 to 1983, Korogachi's image revived again.
Hmm.
Maeda took then opening match wrestler Nobuhiko Takada with him as a practice partner, and Carl in Tampa trained 23-year-old Akira Maeda and 22-year-old young Nobuhiko Takada his style. Later on, how big of a star they both became.
I mean, it was the new generation. Those three names that you named right there became,
Mm-hmm.
and they were always they'd always bring up Gotch in those broadcasts, and I think Was Gotch brought over for any of those UWF shows to make an
Yeah,
appearance?
yeah. That he 1984 version of UWF. It's like actually we have to rewind a little bit. Karl Gotch's very last match as an active wrestler was January 1st and January 8th, 1982. All of a sudden, New Japan decided to bring Karl Gotch over for a tour, for his final tour. January 1st against then not so famous Yoshiaki Fujiwara. And January 8th, Osamu Kido. Karl Gotch had two exhibition matches and did his final German suplex on TV.
Hmm. What year was that?
82,
82.
January 1st, 80, and January 8th, 82. There was a reason. There was a reason. Masafuchi of All Japan, you know, he was actually All Japan wrestler, but while he was living in Florida, excursion tour with Onita, he was in Florida, young Masafuchi. He actually decided to go to Karl Gotch's house to train. And nothing political, right? It's like he wanted to learn from Karl Gotch, genuinely. And Jan Baba had an idea. Rio Tag Team Tournament, 1981. Karl Gotch and Billy Robinson was going to be the team. That never happened.
Wow.
1981. So if that happened, Karl Gotch and Billy Robinson as a team would have the match against the Funks or Abdullah the Butcher and the Sheik.
And that year was such a hot year, such a crazy and popular year for All Japan.
Yeah, yeah. So I
Wow.
think
Imagine that.
New Japan and Antonio caught the rumor, are they bringing in, is All Japan and Jan Baba bringing in Karl Gotch into that tag team tournament? And sure enough, that 1981 December All Japan's tag team tournament thing didn't happen, and Karl Gotch was brought back to New Japan Ring in January 1st of 1982. Oh wow, very political, right?
Very.
Yeah, but that reminded. Then fast forward about 3 years, 2 years, 3 years. That the Carl was once again the big time trainer, coach, whole new generation. That Satoru Sayama, that Yoshiaki Fujiwara leaving New Japan, young Akira Maeda, young Nobuhiko Takada, Kazuo Yamazaki. All these people left New Japan to form first version of UWF. No nonsense. That's when they started this whole UWF style. That no bouncing off the ropes, no fancy drop kicks, no fighting outside the ring. That you just do. And when you think about it, it's what the Karl Gotch would do in the ring. And Karl Gotch became again symbol of deity, I should say, of UWF style. Then soon enough that the Karl Gotch was brought into UWF ring. Not as a wrestler, of course, but he is there as your witness of the match, but more like your what do you call it?
Honored guest.
Yeah, or
Or spokesperson or
more spiritual position,
like a not
moral.
yeah, like kind of like the face of the company, not the face of the company, but like you said, the spirit of the
That
company.
represent the whole image of what they're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it's like a UWF thing, and Akira Maeda, Fujiwara, Satoru Sayama, this really revived Karl Gotch image again in 80s. Very interesting, huh?
Yeah.
And in 90s, when Masakatsu Funaki, that today's Minoru Suzuki, that all these guys from Fujiwara Gumi left Fujiwara Gumi to form Pancras. They went to Korogachi's place. And Korogachi named the company Pancras. Isn't that interesting?
And it became very different. I mean, it was marketed like pro wrestling, but it was
Yeah, because the
MMA.
UWF was still in the realm of professional wrestling, but the Pancras wanted to make it all the way to like no finish. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? Yeah. But the Korogachi was there to help them because those wrestling technique will be the same. Work or not.
And
Does that
even
make sense?
today, yeah, and even today, you see a lot of these techniques. I mean, more developed forms of them, but the root
And
techniques are pretty
and
similar.
also the audience have studied, educated
Yes,
audience.
more
Yeah,
literate audience too. They
yeah, yeah,
understand. Yeah,
yeah. So and also Koro ended up training like not just Masakatsu Funaki and Minoru Suzuki and his friends, but like a trained people like Ken Shamrock.
that's right.
Oh wow! So it's like an entire generation of the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s, all influenced by Karl Gotch.
And even today, when we talked about Minoru Suzuki a minute ago, I mean, we see
Karl
him
Gotch
pretty.
pile driver.
Yeah, it's a regular move in the lexicon of pro wrestling today. You hear
And
Gotch style all
today's
the time.
Japanese professional wrestlers using German suplex every day, not knowing the origin of it.
Maybe every match.
Pretty much. I think it's the coolest looking wrestling move ever, right?
It's just such a common part of pro wrestling, especially Japanese pro wrestling.
Yeah,
Uh,
but when the Kuro did it, or when Inoki did it, or other 70s wrestler did the German suplex, that was a sure go home. No, you
right,
know,
right.
nobody kicks out from it. Little bit of influence today's like guys like Kento Miyahara, of course, not having any direct influence of Kuro, but the shutdown suplex is to revive German suplex. I
Mm.
mean, it's a sure finish. Nobody kicks out.
Definitive, and also, yeah, protected. No
Yeah,
one, no one
and
touches
the
it. Yeah.
And the reason I myself was a huge fan of Coral was that, of course, as a kid, I went to, when I was fifth grade, I went to watch non-televised Inoki against Coral Gotch single match as a kid. Of course, big fan. But later on, when I became magazine, writer, I was fortunate enough to spend time with Coral. I was like the luckiest guy, and being able to sit down with Karl Gotch and talk wrestling for hours, no interruption. But what I enjoyed or like was honored, of course, but was impressed the most was that it doesn't matter how many times the same question was repeated or asked. Karl Gotch was the kind of person who never changed his story.
Hmm.
I'm not saying anybody in particular, but the people change story over the years, right?
Hmm.
Or the feeling have changed, or the way you look at the situation changed, and therefore the story you tell will vary sometimes. But for Carl Gotch, it doesn't matter how many times the same question was asked or repeated over and over, he would give you exact same story. So honest,
Yeah,
right?
because he was in a world where it was easy to step into dishonesty, and if he played the role where if he's real, then he doesn't need to worry about anything. I think that's the approach that
Yeah,
he
and then
took.
being honest and expect his friend to be honest.
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
More
Oh,
similar to
that's
somebody like a Bruno Sammartino than any contemporary.
I would say more like a religious person.
Yes, or like martial arts. There's like a kind
Oh,
of.
the master. Yeah, more like a master of your martial arts.
Hmm.
Yeah, and or more like a Christian, pastor or priest.
He
Yeah.
really he believes it, and he never. It wasn't just not just an act.
No, 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 it was all real for him.
It was
Yeah,
him.
really. I mean, nobody's watching, but he gets up 5 o'clock in the morning and does his
Hmm.
morning dozen. You know, nobody's watching, but he kept his own dojo, like a training space in his garage at home. He uses the deck a card 10 or 10 push-up. If it's a spade, you do the push-up. If you do the heart comes out, it's your setup. Or if it's a diamond, you do this. These are the sets of rules that he trains until the whole deck of cards is going through, went through. It just Oh God, he just does it in the morning. And I asked, why would you do this when you were almost 70 years old? Nobody's watching. His answer was, because I eat a lot. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and it was a
Yeah.
different age too, where there was no pressure to do everything in public. He was
Yeah, and
believed
then
in what he
another
was
thing he
doing.
taught me was that from where I come from, anybody who talk about himself stinks. So he never bragged, you know. I mean,
We,
him, yeah, him and his important friend knows how he is, and he never have to advertise himself. Never felt that way.
mm, he would let
Yeah,
his technique and his wrestling speak for it. What he did, his actions.
and only deal with friends he trusts.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah,
We should mention you got a chance to do a documentary on
yeah.
Karl Gotch.
Kami-sama, yeah, it's out there. Yeah, so I consider myself very lucky. So I asked Carl, can I come in the film that the videotape used? I go, come in, and he didn't act. He just went over there early in the morning and the videotape, whatever he was doing. And I brought Fujiwara with him to to talk to. So they sat down and talked all day, and I filmed it. Yeah, it yeah, became a documentary. And also he was like not grumpy. He was like always like a humming. It's like a very happy person. Yeah, and he had this harmonica that he played. Yeah. Oh God,
Hey,
it's like I can talk about Karl Gotch all day long. I'm a big fan
I
to
mean,
this day.
I think we covered a lot in today's episode because it's a unique situation because, like you said, there's so little footage of him available out there, and
Right.
he built so
That
much of his career on that reputation.
most famous thing being New Japan's opening match, March of 1972. Right.
Mm,
It's
mm.
not a videotape; it's movie film. You know, and the one the Karl Gotch won, but he was already 47. And following year, that the following year, then Inoki and Seiji Sakaguchi against Korogachi Luthes tag team match, 2 out of 3 fall. That's on New Japan World. Yeah, that's in New Japan World. Today's New Japan World. That's a streaming service. Those are two famous ones, but nothing on his prime time.
Hmm.
Oh, there's a black and white footage, 1961, Korogachi's first tour to Japan against Michiaki Yoshimura the night he introduced uh, German suplex. At the time, they called it atomic suplex. At the
That's
time,
right. That's right.
yeah,
That's on YouTube.
that's on YouTube. But those are about the only like really really good footage of Korogach. He must have had what 1,000 other matches, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
that,
or I don't know if they're official matches or they're sparring sessions or uh,
yeah. And then sometimes you find a news clip result from like Australia, 1966 or something, and says like they say Korogach against take on all comers. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Did
mm,
he take a tough guy from the audience,
right,
right?
right.
Yeah, take on all comers, like all comers, meaning like didn't even mention the name of the wrestler. So it must have been one of those things that I'll take on all comers, pin me for $5,000 kind of
Mm.
thing.
Very old school.
Very old school. Yeah, so like some mysterious part remains, but Carl was so real, and yeah, it was honored to really I had a chance to, spend some time. I took him to while he was, staying in Japan 3 months at a time. I was fortunate enough to take him to sumo building to watch sumo. I mean, not same sumo palace, but not the wrestling night. He wanted to watch sumo wrestling, right? Went to sumo dojo, sumo bear, like like a morning practice, and watched Chio no Fuji practice in the morning. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. I would Kakutogi Tsushin magazine, that the martial arts magazine. I took him to quite a few karate masters' house, and they had talk, interview, and yeah, it's like everybody had respect for Karl Gotch. Yeah,
Mm. Wow. He had that reputation. It's amazing how much of how strong his reputation was.
yeah, yeah. And he didn't come back in Japan after 90s. He was telling people that he's too old to travel, and then he had skin cancer here and skin cancer there, living in Florida.
Mm.
And at the end, what do you call that? Um, erratic aneurysm.
Hmm. Aneurysm.
Yeah, that the blood exploded inside him. Yeah, yeah, and then he passed away. After his wife Ella passed away in '94, he lived all by himself another 14 years or so. And he said that's when he started drinking a little bit, a lot. you know,
Hmm.
yeah. And at the time, Osamu Nishimura was living in Tampa, so every week he went to check up on him.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Right,
So
I
that
heard they were
was
pretty close.
yeah, not as a New Japan wrestler, but that he Nishimura wanted to be friends with him, because he wanted to learn and just not just wrestling part, but wanted to sit down and just listen to him for hours and hours. Yeah. So from all the way from Rikidozan Inoki to all the way to Osamu Nishimura, Yuki Ishikawa, huh? Yeah.
A lot of different people, a lot of influential
Oh,
people, or
everybody in between Akira Maeda, Fujiwara, Sayama, Takada, everybody. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it's
Very
it's
interesting.
pretty it's unprecedented, and he
Oh, yeah. I can't forget Masakatsu Funaki and Minoru Suzuki later on,
mm,
right? Yeah.
it's easy to forget because they're still active.
Yeah. And after Pancrase, they came back to traditional pro wrestling now
Hmm.
and gave
That's
them
right.
longevity, you know? Yeah. And Minoru Suzuki, what, the 54, 55?
Mm.
That he's still strong. Yeah.
He was
And
more
he,
active than ever, I think.
right, and went into not just New Japan Strong, but all kinds of different independent card in America. And it's like when he come out, he's like a real life samurai. I mean, like,
Yeah,
yeah,
over the
samurai
top.
came into life. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's a little bit of Karl Gotch in him, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely, definitely.
So so that was I get carried away because I love Karl Gotch. Yeah.
Well, I guess if anyone out there that's listening has a specific question about Karl Gotch, Fumi's the guy that you have to talk to. He's the one.
I don't know about that, but
Well, I think you're one of the few people who actually got to spend some time with him. It's more and more
I
rare. So,
fortunate. Yeah. I consider myself very, very lucky. Yeah. It was
so
like my hero. Yeah.
if people wanted to ask you questions about the Kami-sama pro wrestling,
Yeah.
where can they reach you?
Oh, at Twitter at Fumihiko Dayo, FUMIHIKODAYO at Fumihiko Dayo, or just Fumi Saito on Facebook.
And on Twitter, I'm at Justin M Knipper KNIPPER. All right, that's it for this week. So Fumi, until next week, take it away.
So long from Tokyo.